I drove for hours to my mountain lodge to recover from burnout, only to find my sister and her entire in-law family had moved in. They laughed at my shock and told me to leave, so I called my lawyer and a tow truck they never saw coming. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The engine's hum was the only sound that had kept me sane for the last 6 hours. My hands ached, clamped tight to the steering wheel, and my eyes burned from exhaustion. I wasn't just tired, I was depleted, hollowed out by months of 100-hour work weeks that had finally culminated in a diagnosis of severe professional burnout. My doctor had been blunt. Go somewhere you feel safe, Seraphina, or you will collapse. So I went to the only place I'd ever built just for me, my lodge. Tucked deep in the mountains, it was my sanctuary, the physical proof of my success as an architect, and the one place on earth where I could simply be. I turned onto the long, private gravel road, the crunch of the tires a familiar, welcoming sound. But as I rounded the final bend, my headlights illuminated a scene that made my breath hitch. There were cars in my driveway. Not one, but 3, including a luxury sedan I didn't recognize. My heart hammered with a sudden, cold dread. I parked, my exhaustion momentarily forgotten, and fumbled for my keys. I walked up the stone path I had laid with my own hands and slid my key into the lock. It didn't turn. It was jammed. Frantic, I pounded on the heavy oak door. Lights snapped on inside. A moment later, the door swung open, but it wasn't a stranger. It was my brother-in-law, Ben. He was wearing my favorite bathrobe. Ben, what on earth's? He looked annoyed, not apologetic. Seraphina, what are you doing here? He asked, as if I were the intruder. Before I could answer, a woman I'd never seen, older, with a sour, entitled face, pushed past him. Ben, who is this? It's freezing, shut the door. From behind them, I could see my living room. My custom-built furniture was rearranged. Wine bottles and unfamiliar coats were strewn everywhere. And then, my sister Chloe appeared, her face pale. Oh, Sera, you're here. Here, I echoed, my voice trembling. Chloe, what is going on? Who are these people? The older woman sniffed, pulling the robe tighter. We're family, dear. I'm Margaret, Ben's mother, and we're living here now. My jaw dropped. Living here? What do you mean, living here? This is my house. Ben stepped forward, his charisma weaponized into a dismissive shield. Sera, relax. Chloe said you never used the place. We just needed a break, and it's perfect for the whole family. You can't expect us to turn down such a great offer. I didn't offer it, I cried, my voice cracking. I looked past him to my sister, who was hiding behind her husband's shoulder. Chloe, you told them they could move in. Chloe wouldn't meet my eyes. Well, you're always working, Sera, and Ben's family needed a place to gather. Margaret's house is being renovated. Margaret, the mother-in-law, pushed her way to the front. And frankly, it's a bit selfish to keep a place this large all to yourself. We've been here for 3 weeks, and it's been wonderful. Don't be difficult. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. 3 weeks. They had been living in my home for 3 weeks. They had changed the locks. They were wearing my clothes. I was exhausted, fragile, and now I was homeless, locked out of my own sanctuary by my own sister. I stumbled back from the door, a cold fury mixing with the overwhelming exhaustion. You can't be serious, I whispered. We are, Ben said, his tone final. He started to close the door. Look, it's late. Why don't you go find a motel in town and we can talk about this in the morning? The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the freezing mountain air. I stood there for a full minute, shaking, the betrayal a physical ache that was sharper than any burnout. I got back in my car, my mind racing. They were so confident, so dismissive, so sure of their right to my property. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten who I was. I had designed this lodge. I hadn't just picked out blueprints, I had bled for this place. I spent 2 years overseeing every joint, every stone, every pane of glass. I had sacrificed relationships, holidays, and my own health to build my architectural firm, and this lodge was the fruit of that labor. It was my fortress. I'd always been the responsible one. While I was in graduate school, I was also paying for Chloe's a little too long self-discovery phase. When she met Ben, I was wary, but I wanted her to be happy. I paid for their wedding. I co-signed on their first apartment. I had given and given and given. Ben was a black K hole of need, dressed in a sharp suit. He worked in investments, a term so vague it set off every alarm bell in my head. He was all charm and vague promises, but I saw the way his eyes tracked my expensive watch, the way he'd make casual inquiries about the value of my firm. His mother, Margaret, was worse. She was openly disdainful of my career-obsessed life, constantly making passive-aggressive comments about how I didn't have a family of my own. To her, my success wasn't an accomplishment, it was a resource to be tapped. She saw my lodge not as my home, but as an asset Chloe was entitled to by association. I drove to the only motel in the small town at the base of the mountain, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles were white. The betrayal from Chloe hurt the most. I had built this lodge with a small guest suite specifically for her, a place she could come anytime. But she hadn't just come for a visit. She had colluded with her husband to steal my home. They hadn't just overstayed a welcome, they had staged a coup. As I checked into the musty room, my initial shock began to crystallize into cold, hard resolve. They saw me as a burnt-out, emotionally fragile woman. They saw me as a pushover, a resource to be plundered. They thought they could just take my sanctuary because I was too tired to fight. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The turning point didn't happen with a shout. It happened with the quiet click of my laptop in a dim motel room. My fog of burnout was evaporating, replaced by the sharp, focused adrenaline that had made me a successful architect. I wasn't just a victim. I was a strategist. They had forgotten the one crucial thing. I hadn't just built a house. I had built a fortress, legally and physically. The lodge and the 20 acres of land it sat on was not owned by Seraphina. It was owned by S-Lodge Holdings, LLC. I had created the limited liability company years ago on the advice of my lawyer, both for tax purposes and as a liability shield. I was the sole managing member. This meant Ben, Chloe, Margaret, and their gaggle of cousins weren't family guests who overstayed. They were trespassers on corporate property. My first call at 7 a.m. sharp was to my lawyer, David. "They changed the locks," he asked, his voice instantly alert, "on the S-Lodge property." "They're living there, David, the whole family." "Seraphina," he said, and I could hear him typing. "This is not a family dispute. This is trespassing. You, as the managing member of the LLC, have every right to have them removed. Immediately." "I know," I said, "but I think there's more going on. Ben was too slick, too entitled. He's not just on vacation." David agreed to contact the local sheriff's department to arrange for a civil standby, emphasizing that this was an LLC removing unauthorized occupants, not a messy domestic squabble. While he handled the legal side, I handled the investigation. It took me less than 30 minutes. Ben's investment company wasn't just vague, it was a ghost, but Ben himself was not. A few searches of public records and court databases painted a horrifying picture. His name was listed on half a dozen pending lawsuits for fraud. His primary residence, the one Margaret was supposedly renovating, was in foreclosure. They weren't on vacation. They were hiding. They were hiding from creditors in a remote, private, high-value property they assumed I was too busy and too burnt out to care about. They weren't just using my lodge, they were using me as a human shield. My second call was to the local towing company. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I'm the owner of the private Road Up on Mountain Spur. I need a heavy-duty tow truck sent to the lodge at noon. There are several vehicles trespassing on my property." My trap was set. At 11:45 a.m., I drove my car back up my private road, parking it to block the narrowest part of the exit. I walked the remaining quarter mile. A sheriff's deputy, a tall man named Officer Harris, was already waiting for me at the bottom of the driveway in his cruiser. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "My dispatch received a call from your attorney. Understand you have some unauthorized occupants on corporate property." "That's correct, officer. Thank you for being here. This is a civil standby. I just need to ensure they vacate the premises peacefully." I walked up to the door and, ignoring the locked knob, used the heavy brass knocker. It took a long time, but finally, Ben opened the door, a cup of my coffee in his hand. He was still in my robe. When he saw me, he smiled, but it was a cold, reptilian expression. When he saw the deputy's cruiser, the smile faltered. "Seraphina, we told you to come back later. This isn't a good time." "It's not a good time for me either, Ben. You and your family need to pack your things and leave. Immediately." Margaret appeared behind him. "Don't be ridiculous. We are not going anywhere." "Chloe is your sister. You can't just kick your family out." "You are not my family, Margaret," I said, my voice echoing in the cold air. "And this is not my house. This property is owned by Lodge Holdings, LLC. I am the sole managing member and you are trespassing. Officer Harris is here to ensure you vacate." Ben laughed. It was a hollow, desperate sound. "An LLC? Don't be absurd. You're not going to see your own sister. Chloe, get out here." My sister appeared, looking terrified. "Sierra, please, don't do this. Ben just needs a little time." "Time for what, Chloe?" "To hide from the half-dozen people suing him for fraud. Time to let the bank finalize the foreclosure on your house." The color drained from Ben's face. Margaret gasped, "Lies, how dare you?" "It's all public record, Margaret," I said. I pulled out my phone and dialed my lawyer. "David, you're on speakerphone with Ben, Chloe, and Margaret. Would you like to explain the legal definition of criminal trespassing and conversion of assets?" David's voice, crisp and professional, boomed from the phone. "Mr. and Mrs. Evans, you are illegally occupying a corporate asset. If you are not off the property in 1 hour, the LLC will be filing for an immediate eviction and pursuing damages. Given your other legal troubles, Mr. Evans, I highly doubt you want another charge on your record." Ben's hand was shaking. You witch," he snarled at me. "You wouldn't." Ben's bravado shattered like cheap glass. "You can't prove any of that," he yelled, but his eyes darted nervously toward the deputy, who was standing impassively by his car. "I don't have to," I said calmly. "The lawsuits are public. The foreclosure is public. But what's not public, at least not yet, is that you've been using my property's address to reroute your mail, haven't you? Trying to make it look like you have a stable residence. That's mail fraud, Ben. It's a federal offense." Margaret, realizing her son's mask was completely gone, switched tactics. She turned on Chloe. "Chloe, are you going to let her do this to us? To your husband? After all we've done for you." Chloe burst into tears. "Sierra, please," she sobbed. "We have nowhere else to go. He didn't mean. I didn't know it was this bad, I swear." "That's the problem, Chloe," I said, my voice hard but not without a sliver of pity for my sister. "You never want to know. You just want to be taken care of. You let this con man and his horrible mother walk all over you, and you let them walk all over me." "We're not leaving," Margaret shrieked, moving to slam the door. Officer Harris took one step forward. "Ma'am, I advise against that. This is a civil matter for now. But if you refuse to vacate, you will be trespassing, and I will be forced to arrest you." Ben looked at his mother, then at me, his mind clearly racing for another angle. "Fine, we'll go, but it will take us hours to pack. Days, even, you'll have to wait." He smirked, thinking he'd found a loophole. "No, you won't," I said. "You have exactly 10 minutes to get all of your vehicles off my property. After that, they will be removed." "Removed by who?" Ben scoffed. "You." As if on cue, the deep, rumbling groan of a heavy engine echoed up the mountain road. A massive, bright-red heavy-duty tow truck appeared at the end of the driveway, its lights flashing. The tow truck pulled up right behind the deputy's cruiser, its massive hook and winch glinting in the sunlight. The driver, a burly man in overalls, hopped out and nodded to me. "Ma'am, S-Lodge Holdings, got an order for 3 unauthorized vehicles on this private road." Ben's face went from pale to a sickly, mottled gray. "You can't do that. That's illegal." "Actually, it's not," I replied, folding my arms. "This is a private road, clearly marked, which is also owned by the LLC. Your vehicles are trespassing. I am having them legally removed. At your expense, of course. The impound lot is 40 miles from here. I'm sure you can call a cab from town once you're done." The deputy, maintaining his professional calm, added, "He's right, ma'am. This is your property. You can have them towed." Margaret let out a sound like a deflating balloon. "Our cars, you monster, our luggage is in there, my medication." "Then I suggest you move very, very quickly," I said, gesturing to the tow truck driver, who was already assessing the first car, Margaret's precious luxury sedan. What followed was the most pathetic, frantic, and deeply satisfying display of panic I had ever witnessed. Ben and Margaret, who moments before had been arrogant lords of the manor, were now scrambling like rats. They ran back into the lodge, grabbing armfuls of designer clothes, half-empty bags of chips, and laptops, shoving them haphazardly into their cars. Ben's other family members, cousins I hadn't even met, spilled out of the house in a state of confusion, yelling at Ben, who was just yelling at everyone. "Move, get the car keys. He's going to tow it," Margaret screamed, dropping an expensive vase on the stone walkway where it shattered. "I'm trying," Ben roared, fumbling with his keys. One by one, they piled into their cars, tires spitting gravel as they peeled out of my driveway, squeezing past my parked car on the narrow road. Margaret gave me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred as she sped past. In less than 5 minutes, they were gone. The only one left was Chloe, standing on the porch, sobbing, surrounded by the wreckage of their hasty exit. The silence that fell was sudden and absolute, broken only by the rumble of the tow truck's engine. The tow truck driver gave me a final nod. "Looks like my work here is done, ma'am." "Thank you for your time," I said. "Please send the bill for your call-out fee directly to the LLC." He and Officer Harris departed, and I was left alone on the porch with my sister. She was a heap on the top step, weeping into her hands. For a long moment, I just watched her, the anger and betrayal warring with a lifetime of sisterly affection. He ruined us, Sera," she whispered, her voice choked. "He said it was just a cash flow problem. He said his mother's house was just a remodel. He told me you'd be fine with it, that you'd want to help." "And you believed him," I said, not as a question, but as a statement. I sat down next to her, not touching her, just looking out at the mountains. The air was crisp and clean. "He's a con man, Chloe, and he will drag you down with him as long as you let him." We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, I stood up. "I'm going to call a locksmith, and then I am going to take a very long bath. What you do next is up to you." I offered her a choice. She could go with Ben, or she could start over. I would help her, I explained, but not with a handout. I would pay for her to get a small apartment in the city, and I'd pay for a therapist. But she would have to file for divorce, and she would have to get a job. The free ride was over. This time, she accepted. By evening, the locks were changed. Chloe was gone, picked up by a car service I'd ordered to take her to a hotel near my lawyer's office, where she would begin the process of untangling her life from Ben's. I stood in my living room, now quiet and thankfully empty. It was a mess, but it was my mess. I opened the great windows, letting the cold, clean mountain air sweep through the space, clearing out the lingering scent of their entitlement. I was still exhausted, still burnt out. But as I watched the sunset paint the peaks in shades of purple and gold, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. I was in my sanctuary, and I was safe.